Hello there. So here we are on another conversation with the Holy Politician podcast. Everybody is well, and that you are just looking forward to just opening up your eye gates and your ear gates to what God is saying through the lens of truth and politics and policy in America. And so today I wanted to cover a couple of things that are happening really on the Hill in the United States Congress, and just to remind us to continue to pray for our elected officials. We should be praying for our country with frequency, not just what's happening at the federal level in DC, but what's happening locally, what's happening at the state level. There are some transitions that are going to be taking place in January. January is right around the corner, and we're going to have some new governors taking office. We're going to have a new president taking office in January. And there's still a lot of angst from what happened during the general election, but we just have to stay on our post. That's what our job is as kingdom citizens, is to remain on our post. And that requires lots of prayer and diligence and dedication to the word of God. Today is 12/12/24, and that is significant. God is very strategic with even numbers in the Bible. And the number 12 is very significant because God allowed the number 12 to be used for the choosing of Jesus's disciples. But it also is significant because it reflects the 12 tribes of Israel. And so I'm grateful that God gave us this day. And I've been asking God for the past few months, why is this day significant? And I'm still asking God to give me understanding on the meaning and the purpose of 12/12/24. Um, in Revelation chapter 4, it talks about how the 24 elders were surrounding the throne, and there were 24 basically additional thrones around the main throne, and how the 24 elders cast their crowns as the four beasts or the four living creatures were saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, the Lord who was and is to come. And so you have these 24 elders, which some scholars say represent the 12 disciples, as well as the 12 tribes of Israel, that were constantly morning, noon, and night casting their crowns in the presence of God. And so I'm just grateful that 12/12/24 for me is a reminder of the holiness of God and how he is holy and honorable and worthy, and how he does not permit us to tarnish or to taint his holiness, because then it's disrespect to the glory of our Father. And so 12/12/24, if you haven't had a chance to read the book of Revelation lately, I'd encourage you to read Revelation chapter 4. And so here we are at the end of the calendar year. And every time, really, nearly every time this year, we are wondering if the United States Congress is going to successfully pass a budget. And every year they end up implementing something called a continuing resolution, which is not them successfully looking at all of the appropriations packages and agreeing on them. And so typically there's a trigger that kicks in a standard appropriations package that kind of funds the government year to year. And so right at the Christmas break hour, we're wondering, are we going to have a government funded into the new year? And we're doing that right now. We have 8 days before the federal government runs out of money. But we also are dealing with right now, usually there's funding for the Department of Defense and all of the military affairs that happen globally. And right now on Capitol Hill, the National Defense Authorization Act, which funds the branches of the military and everything related from JROTC programs to what happens at the end of one's military career, they are basically in the process of reauthorizing and appropriating funding for the military apparatuses of our country. And another interesting component to this National Defense Authorization Act is TRICARE. And TRICARE basically is healthcare reform for vets. So if you are a person that served in the United States military, you have access to TRICARE. It's similar to Medicare, which is free healthcare basically for people who may be of low income. TRICARE is basically free healthcare for people who served in the United States military. So if you've honorably discharged, if you've served in the United States military, you and retired, you can benefit from TRICARE. My family benefits from TRICARE because my husband served in the military for 20 years. And so he did his due diligence and served our country honorably. And now provides an opportunity for us to have healthcare benefits for our children. And so that's a blessing, right? So TRICARE really is something that's put in place to be a blessing to people that have served their nation as well as their dependents. And so what typically should not be a controversial topic around this vet healthcare benefit has become one. And the reason it's become one is because this bill, this National Defense Authorization Act, has basically, it's not in limbo, but there's a provision that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has added to this reauthorization, and he's attached it to the TRICARE provision. And what this provision is something that I wholeheartedly agree with. It's basically blocking the ability of service members to allow their children to have gender affirming care. So I'm going to read the language in this piece of legislation for you so that you can hear the language and understand what this provision would do, but also understand why Speaker Mike Johnson cares about this provision. Because there apparently or allegedly are certain families that are using TRICARE to pay for gender affirming care for their minor children. And that's a problem because that's your taxpayer dollars that are being used to basically provide for this confusing, what should be an illegal procedure and processes that take away the ability for kids to be kids and add to the confusion that they're already under. Now, this provision that I'm getting ready to read has caused some angst amongst members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. So obviously, Democrats are upset because if they say that this is a dirty tactic used by the Republican Party or used by the Republican leader to take away the rights of families and doctors. What about the rights of children whose frontal lobe hasn't fully been developed, and yet you are giving them this gender affirming care, which leads to the mutilation of young kids that don't know any better? Some Republicans are not happy with it because they're saying that this fight against gender ideology should wait until January when Trump takes office. And they're saying that this really just is a thorn in our side because we just want to pass this bill. We want to make sure that there's funding for the Department of Defense. We want to make sure that there's funding for the military. But with Speaker Mike Johnson throwing in this kind of this wrench at the last hour, they feel like we should just be able to pass a clean bill. But Speaker Mike Johnson is absolutely adamant about this language that he's added to this package. And this is what the language reads. It's called a prohibition of coverage under TRICARE program of certain medical procedures for children that could result in sterilization. And if you read Section 1079 of Title 10, the United States Code, they're amending it by adding at the end the following new paragraph. And it reads, medical interventions for the treatment of gender dysphoria that could result in sterilization may not be provided to a child under the age of 18. And that's pretty plain and simple. If you are trying to provide any form of medical intervention to treat gender dysphoria for children, you will not be doing it with taxpayer-funded TRICARE dollars. Now, I don't know why this is so controversial. It doesn't seem controversial to me that the Speaker of the United States Congress would want to protect children. This should not be a controversial thing, and yet it has become that. And it's become something that's become political, which is protecting children, which are a vulnerable population. And so in my opinion, it doesn't matter if this is added to the Farm Bill, which is the bill that's used for the agricultural department. It doesn't matter if this is added to the Education Bill. It doesn't matter if this is added to the Defense Bill. We should be protecting children in each and every one of those pieces of legislation at any and all costs. So, and yet this has become a controversial thing. And so continue to pray for our leaders in the United States Congress that they would be guided by wisdom, that they would use sound judgment. This doesn't even require the use of the Bible. If we are allowing children to decide that they want to be boys or girls when they were born in a particular body, and we're using taxpayer funded dollars to treat and fund this delusion, you don't need the Bible for that. It just doesn't make any common logical sense. So, in other news, you may have heard of Representative Nancy Mace that was accosted recently on Capitol Hill by an activist because of her stance of protecting women's spaces and bathrooms on Capitol Hill. And so Nancy Mace made history, but we don't learn about the positive history of Nancy Mace when she made history becoming the first woman to graduate from the Corps Cadets program at the Citadel, which is a prestigious military institution in South Carolina. So she became this historic figure who also was elected to Congress from South Carolina. And she's been in office, I believe, since 2021. But she's making news now because she basically doesn't like the fact that Sarah McBride is going to be coming to Congress in January, trying to use women's spaces as a man. Sarah McBride claims to be a woman because this person identifies as being transgender. And Nancy Mace is trying to be proactive and say, when this person comes to Congress, I don't want to see him in the restroom. And again, this is something that should not be controversial, and yet it is. And she was accosted, and she's getting death threats every day because she's saying, I want my restroom to be safe. So we got to continue to pray. These things are very upsetting, and yet we have to remember that our fight is not against flesh and blood. It's against spiritual forces in high places. So Nancy Mace recently drafted a resolution, which is HR 1579. You can look it up. And it prohibits members, officers, and employees of the House of Representatives from using facilities other than those corresponding to their biological sex. And this includes the newly elected member that I just described, Sarah McBride, who is a biological man, but may want to use biological female spaces in the House of Representatives. And so these are the tactics or the strategies that commonsensical people have to resort to, adding language in the defense bill, adding language and creating new pieces of legislation just to protect children and just to protect women. And so if we are not aware of these things that are happening in Congress, if we're not aware of these things that are happening at the local level, and if we're being apathetic and not saying anything about it, if we're voting the same way, this is when we need to shift and make change. And so I want to encourage you to pray and take a stand. The inauguration is coming up on January the 20th. Pray for there to be a peaceful transfer of power. Continue to pray for all of our elected officials. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle they are on. Continue to pray for President Trump, whose life they've tried to take now twice. Pray that he gets into the White House safely. Pray for his family, whether you like him or not. An attack on the President of the United States is an attack on our constitutional republic. And so we should continue to pray. And so I'd encourage you again to read Revelation 4. 12, 12, 24 is significant. Read Revelation 4 and ask God for understanding and wisdom whenever you read his word. God bless you. And until we see you again next time, be safe. Take care. Bye-bye.